This whole iceberg trend has been going on for quite a while, but hey, I understand that maybe everyone doesn't keep up with the stuff in internet culture. I don't keep up with everything in internet culture. No worries, I'll catch you up. An iceberg chart pretty much reads like a tier list, but instead the information is sorted from most known to least known. All the information that's generally well known is towards the top, you get it, the tip of the iceberg. Then as we dive deeper, things get more obscure, and with certain icebergs, more disturbing and creepy, even though I don't think the disturbing and creepy is a factor in this, because how do you factor in something like that with a guest character inclusion? I don't know. Also, this is just based on the general audience's familiarity with it, so if you know like most of these, 90% of these, you're probably just a fighting game nerd like I am, okay? And of course, you know what a guest character is, a character making an appearance in a franchise outside of their own. For the record, we will be including first and third party guest characters, with first party guests being characters from video games owned by one company or close affiliates, and third party guest characters, which most people think about when they talk about guest characters, with a character being from a whole nother company. Additionally, I have a couple standards in which I put this iceberg together that I'm just going to point out right now. First of all, we are looking at only playable characters, whether they are instantly available on the roster, unlockable by playing, DLC, unlockable with a code, or hacking if their data is in the game. We are only looking at playable characters. Second of all, shared universes are irrelevant. We are looking at this more from the perspective of the franchises rather than whether or not the universes that are crossing over are canon to one another. Think of it like this. Imagine you live in the same city as me, but we live in different homes. The city is like our shared universe, and our homes are like our respective franchises. If I come from my home over to yours to visit, I am a guest in your house. Third, and finally, platform fighters will be included. Deal with it. You can write me a novel about how Smash and Rivals of Aether and Brawlhalla aren't real fighting games all you want to. I don't care. I don't care. He doesn't care. Also, I put this iceberg together with some input from some peers, and there are some outliers that I have here. Think of them like honorable mentions because they're not on the iceberg, but I still feel like they're worth mentioning, and I'll explain why I cut them as I list them off right here. So Little Mac in Fight Night Round 2, the GameCube version. This was definitely worth noting, seeing that it actually preceded Little Mac being a full-on playable character in Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U. However, I kept it off of here seeing that there was some disagreement about whether you should consider Fight Night Round 2 a fighting game, seeing that it's a more realistic boxing game and those games tend to be more identifiable with sports games. Like, I get the realism might set it apart from what we usually see as like fighting games with the fantasized over the top stuff and fireballs or whatnot, but I like to think that boxing games literally have some of the same principles that fighting games do, is just executed very differently, whether it's like the format or button presses, what say you. Seeing it ultimately came down to a split decision, I just figured, hey, make it an honorable mention and just go along with it. Donkey Kong in the Wii version of Punch-Out! Again, another boxing game, even though Punch-Out's a little bit more cartoony compared to Fight Night Round 2, but I felt more comfortable excluding Donkey Kong from this iceberg because he's not playable or unlockable in any way, shape, or form. Don't know how many people that follow me are Punch-Out fans, but if there's a way to like hack the game or something and play Donkey Kong in this particular port, let me know. Shaq, Bill and Hillary Clinton, and Michael Jackson in Ready to Rumble Boxing. Yet again, a boxing game. And once again, one that's actually pretty cartoony when you think about it, but still. This was way too interesting just to pass up. Finally, Ingrid in Street Fighter Alpha 3 Max, and just because this intro is going way over the average time even despite how long this video is. Simply put, despite Capcom retroactively trying to rewrite history and considering Ingrid a Street Fighter character, her very first game was Capcom Fighting Evolution. You are more than welcome to debate that and any of the honorable mentions in the comments below. With that all out of the way, whew, what an intro. Let us delve into the fighting game guest character iceberg. How many do you know? Akira Kazama, Street Fighter V. Akira Kazama originally hails from Rival Schools, a unique Capcom favorite among longtime fighting game fans. Accompanied by her big brother Daigo, Akira made a surprise playable return to fighting games in Street Fighter V. Akira not only brought over the Rival School's air combo mechanic, but also optimal combo routes that depended on whether you hit a crouching or standing opponent. In making this guest appearance, she became the first character in the mainline Street Fighter series to come from another Capcom franchise other than Final Fight. Akuma, X-Men Children of the Atom. X-Men Children of the Atom was the first fighting game produced by Capcom using Marvel Comics licensed characters. The game's fast-paced combat, longer than average combos, and other concepts laid the foundation for the Marvel vs. Capcom series. The inclusion of Street Fighter's Akuma on a roster full of Marvel characters could also be seen as a hint at the future crossover. Akuma appears in the game as a secret character, being selectable with the usage of a code at the character select screen. He was included via a contract stipulation for the inclusion of a Street Fighter character to appear in the game. Ezio Auditore, Soul Calibur 5. Ezio Auditore da Firenze of Assassin's Creed is the sole full-on guest character in Soul Calibur 5, as it was Devil Jin's moveset that was available through character creation mode rather than Devil Jin himself. Although he was non-canonical to Soul Calibur 5's story, Ezio was seen as a much befitting character to the Soul Calibur universe compared to some of the series' previous guests who, yeah, we'll get to them later. This is all despite the fact that he would have been dead in 1607, the year in which the game took place. Ezio came to Soul Calibur 5 equipped with his sword, twin assassin blades, dagger, crossbow, and hidden gun, which works similar to Cervantes' firearms. Unlike other characters in the game, he did not take clothing damage, and along with several others, could not have his fighting style mimicked by Kilik or Edgemaster. He had a remixed version of Venice Rooftops as a theme song, which also incorporated elements from another Assassin's Creed 2-track, Ezio's Family. Final Fight characters in Street Fighter. There are several Capcom franchises that share universes with Street Fighter, but none have had more playable characters in it than Final Fight. Guy and Sodom debuted in Street Fighter Alpha, Rolento debuted in Alpha 2, and Cody debuted in Alpha 3. Hugo would make his Street Fighter debut in Street Fighter 3 Second Impact. Poison would make her playable debut in Ultra Street Fighter 4. All of these characters would go on to appear in multiple Street Fighter titles. Finally, Lucia and Abigail would make their debuts in Street Fighter V. Will Final Fight have a presence in Street Fighter 6? History seems to suggest that it definitely will. Geralt of Rivia, 2B, and Howl Maru, Soul Calibur 6. Even Soul Calibur's most recent installment came with some guest characters, all from different franchises. The main roster immediately came with Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher series, possibly due to the fact that he's canon to Soul Calibur 6's story, being the first guest character with said honor. Seeing that interdimensional travel is a thing in the Witcher universe, it makes his appearance all the more fitting. He's a fairly meter-hungry character, especially when using his signs. Despite Geralt not being native to Soul Calibur, he's considered a good character to pick up for those looking to learn the game's fundamentals. Nier Automata's 2B was the first DLC character in Soul Calibur 6. She came equipped with a weapon that has different configurations, a flash step to dodge attacks, some airborne options, projectile attacks courtesy of Pod 042, who acts somewhat like an assist character, and finally a skirt-exploding self-destruct critical edge, which she can only perform while below 30% health. Finally, Howl Maru made his way to the game fresh off of Samurai Showdown's comeback in 2019. He was first announced at EVO 2019 and had me going nuts at my old job. And I worked around a bunch of people that don't know the first thing about this stuff. Howl Maru came with roughly everything. All his special moves, Samsho mechanics, and more to bend the rules of Soul Calibur. Gun, Tekken 3. Gun is the main character of a Japanese manga of the same name. While seeing a character like him mix it up with the Tekken characters may give you the impression he's a joke character, Gun is actually pretty strong. And I don't mean in terms of the meta. I'm not familiar with what the tier list or the meta of Tekken 3 is. In the manga, he's exhibited the ability to support his own weight with his jaws, lift a fully grown African elephant, and possesses quite a durable scaly hide which has enabled him to shrug off attacks from larger creatures. Some of that durability carried over into Tekken 3 as he is fireproof. He even spits fireballs of his own and knocks people out with toxic fart bombs, humorously called Gun with the Wind. There were several ways to unlock Gun, from beating him in Tekken Ball to getting a high score in survival mode and then inputting his name. I wonder if there were any people whose initials are legitimately GON and they submitted it not knowing they coincidentally unlocked a hidden character. Whoa. Injustice guests. The Injustice franchise has had several guest characters, all of whom were included as DLC. Scorpion was the very first one, swiftly teleport punching his ticket into the series' first game. Seeing that Midway Chicago had rebranded itself as NetherRealm Studios, of which Scorpion is the mascot, he was kind of an obvious choice for a guest character. Fellow Mortal Kombat characters Sub-Zero and Raiden would follow suit and be included in Injustice 2. Hellboy would also appear in Injustice 2 as a part of Fighter Pack 2. This would also mark Hellboy's first ever playable fighting game appearance. Finally, the game would receive 4 more guests in the form of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They shared a single slot on the character select, and players would have to modify their preset loadouts in the game's gear customization to select a specific turtle. Despite sharing the same character slot, all 4 of the turtles had their own unique movesets. Kratos and Freddy Krueger. Mortal Kombat 9. Considered one of the best all-time Mortal Kombat games, Mortal Kombat 9 was also the first game in the series to feature guest characters. Those with the PS3 port were given a special guest character in Kratos from God of War. He even came packaged with a special stage, the Chamber of the Flame, which was based on the area housing Pandora's box in which the Flame of Olympus resides. This stage was the first of its kind to feature 3 different stage fatalities, the first non-original stage, as well as being the first arena from another franchise to be featured in Mortal Kombat. Freddy Krueger was the final DLC character to be added to the game. Back in 2020, the complete edition of Mortal Kombat 9 had been pulled from Steam at the request of Warner Bros. Interactive. It is believed that this was due to the license of Freddy Krueger being returned to the estate of Wes Craven in 2019. Link, Heihachi, and Spawn. Soul Calibur 2. Soul Calibur 2 owners each got one of 3 platform-exclusive guest characters: Link for the Nintendo GameCube, Heihachi Mishima for the PS2, and Spawn for the Xbox. Of these 3 guests, one of them was a last-minute backup plan, that being Heihachi. Cloud Strife was originally meant to be the PS2 exclusive, but the licensing deal fell through. The HD version of Soul Calibur 2 included both Heihachi and Spawn. Mortal Kombat X guests. Mortal Kombat X followed its predecessor by including guest characters, albeit more this time around. Though some fans were slightly miffed that he wasn't in the same game as Freddy, Jason Voorhees was brought into Mortal Kombat X in Combat Pack 1. Roughly a week after his reveal, the Xbox Game Store inadvertently leaked the game's second guest character, Predator. Additional Predator-themed skins were also released for Johnny Cage and Jax, the latter bearing the likeness of Carl Weathers, who also provided his voice. Combat Pack 2 would bring 2 more guest characters: Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, armed with his chainsaw and hammer, and Alien, who adopted a tar cotton fighting style for one of its variations due to it being birthed from a tar cotton patrol leader's stomach. Mortal Kombat 11 guests. Mortal Kombat 11 further kept the inclusion of guest characters going in its most recent installment. The number of guests went up from 5 from Mortal Kombat X's 4. 3 of these were characters included in Combat Pack 1, the Terminator, Joker, and Spawn. Terminator was released October 8th, 2020, a couple of weeks shy of the release of Terminator Dark Fate. Though Arnold Schwarzenegger's likeness was used for the Terminator, the voice work was provided by Chris Cox, who had previously voiced Hawkeye in fighting games like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite and UMVC 3. Cox was reportedly handpicked by Schwarzenegger himself to take up the role. Joker, released January 28th, 2020, actually had a film released the year before his release, with Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of him receiving widespread critical acclaim. The character had received a touch-up en route to MK11's release due to widespread criticisms of his appearance in the Combat Pack trailer. Joker's inclusion was notable for being his first ever in a bloody gore fest of a fighting game like Mortal Kombat, as opposed to the significantly much toned down Injustice series, and of course, MK vs. DC Universe. Richard Epcar voiced Joker in all 4 of these games. Spawn, much to my chagrin at the time, was released March 17th, 2020, making him the final guest character and overall character in Combat Pack 1. This would also mark his first fighting game appearance in years since Soul Calibur 2, which spawned references in MK11. When the MK11 expansion Aftermath was released, RoboCop was added to the roster, with actor Peter Weller reprising his role for the first time since RoboCop 2. John Rambo was the final guest character added to the game, with Sylvester Stallone providing his likeness and his voice. Stallone recorded his dialogue at his home via Zoom calls with the NetherRealm staff to circumvent the pandemic. Soul Calibur 4/Broken Destiny guests. The inclusion of Star Wars characters into Soul Calibur was a pretty curious one. Akin to Soul Calibur 2, Soul Calibur 4 came with some console-exclusive guest characters, albeit with a few twists. Initially, Darth Vader appeared on the PS3 port, while Yoda appeared on the Xbox 360 port. The Apprentice was available on both ports. Namco would later make Darth Vader and Yoda available as DLC for the opposite consoles. Many players and journalists criticized the inclusion of the Star Wars characters, with Soul Calibur 5 producer Hisaharu Tago saying many fans thought they, quote, didn't quite fit in the Soul Calibur universe, which played a factor in the inclusion of Ezio in the sequel. The Star Wars guests were also excluded from the Soul Calibur 4 spin-off Broken Destiny and were, in essence, replaced by Kratos. Street Fighter X Tekken guests. The third-party guest characters of Street Fighter X Tekken included Cole McGrath, Bad Box Art Mega Man, Pac-Man, Toro, and Kuro. Interestingly, these guest characters were also console exclusives, only being officially available on the PS3 and PS Vita. According to the game's producer Yoshinori Ono, Capcom had discussed possible 360 exclusive guest characters with Microsoft, but plans unfortunately fell through. Super Smash Bros. Multiple guests. Smash Bros. Started incorporating third-party guests into its rosters in 2008 with Brawl, as Sonic the Hedgehog and Solid Snake made their playable debuts. This was quite huge, seeing Sonic was representing Sega, Nintendo's former rival, while Snake was the first ever playable character from an M-rated game to appear in Smash. Sonic would return in Smash 4 alongside other third-party guests including Mega Man, the cool one, Pac-Man, Ryu, Cloud Strife, and Bayonetta. Come Smash Everybody Is Here Ultimate, all of the aforementioned third-party guests return, along with some more new ones, including Simon Belmont, his Echo Fighter descendant Richter Belmont, Ken Masters, Sephiroth, Joker from Persona, Hero, Banjo and Kazooie, Terry Bogard, Steve, Kazuya Mishima, and finally, Sora. Tekken 7 guests. A while after Tekken 3, Tekken jumped back on the guest character train in Tekken 7. Akuma was the first one confirmed. Not only was he on the main roster in Fated Retribution specifically, but he was seemingly made canon to the Tekken 7 universe as Kazumi orders Akuma to kill Heihachi and Kazuya to repay a debt. Geese Howard would then make his way over to the game, being first revealed at EVO 2017. Akuma and Geese somewhat bent the rules of Tekken, as both brought over moves and mechanics from the respective series. Next was Noctis from Final Fantasy XV, first revealed at the 2017 Tekken World Tour. Utilizing his weapon summons from his home game, Noctis brought a fairly flashy style over into Tekken that'll probably remind some people of his appearances in the Dissidia Final Fantasy series. The Walking Dead's Negan, armed with Lucille, his trusty barbed wire bat, followed afterwards. Jeffrey Dean Morgan reprised his role from the popular television series. Negan's trailer was a rather humorous recreation of the scene in which he's first seen in the television series, replacing Rick Grimes and his group with Tekken characters. Negan was the second Image Comics guest fighter under the Bandai Namco banner, the first of course being Spawn in Soul Calibur 2.
The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water.
Our consciousness is merely the tip of the iceberg.
Dead or Alive 5 guests. Most of the Dead or Alive 5 guests hail from Virtua Fighter. Akita, Pai, and Sarah Bryant were available on the main roster. In the Ultimate Update, Sarah's brother Jackie would join the fray. When I had first picked this game up, I had always thought there was something really weird about the Virtua Fighter characters' audio, and it turned out I discovered all those characters had reused their voice clips, just slightly remastered, I think. In the last round update, Ii Narutoda of Samurai Warriors, who was named and modeled after the real-life daimyo from the Sengoku period, soon made her way to the game. Also, Mai Shiranui made it into the game. You might have heard of her. Eltnum and Akatsuki. Under Night and Birth. The inclusion of Eltnum in Under Night and Birth made sense seeing the game has been compared to her home game, Melty Blood. Originally named Shion Eltnum Atlasia, Eltnum got a little bit of a redesign in Under Night. Additionally, she wasn't voiced by her original voice actress, Ryo Natsuki, and was instead voiced by Satomi Akasaka. Eltnum was also unlockable in Under Night prior to the release of version 1.03 via the usage of a code. Akatsuki from Akatsuki BlitzConf would follow afterwards, being included in the EXE late update. The creators of Akatsuki BlitzConf's subtle style actually drew all of Akatsuki's new sprites for the game. Geese Howard, Art of Fighting 2. I think most people know that Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury take place in the same universe. In contrast to their release dates, the events of Art of Fighting precede those of Fatal Fury, ergo, AOF Geese Howard is younger than the one you commonly see. Geese appears as a secret final boss in Art of Fighting 2 when you win the first 2 rounds of every match in arcade mode. Tekken 7 even included an alternate costume based on his AOF 2 appearance, albeit without the long hair. Missed opportunity. Killer Instinct guests. When Killer Instinct made its comeback in 2013, who would have thought that it would also jump on the guest character bandwagon? All 3 guests were released in the 3rd season of the game in 2016. Rash from Battletoads was an interesting case, as he was voted #1 in a poll on fighting game news site Event Hubs for which Rare or Microsoft character readers wanted to see in Killer Instinct. With the popularity of the Battletoads and the fact that developers who created the beat-em-ups also developed the original Killer Instinct, Rash's inclusion couldn't be more perfect. General Ram from Gears of War actually placed fairly high in the aforementioned Event Hubs poll, taking the #3 spot below Johanna Dark from Perfect Dark. General Ram had actually been leaked on the website Shoryuken sometime before his official reveal. His default appearance is based on his revamped appearance in Gears of War Ultimate Edition, while his retro costume is based on his look in the original Gears of War. Similar to the Virtua Fighter characters in Dead or Alive 5, Ram's voice lines are also reused, coming from the first Gears of War game. Finally, Arbiter from the Halo series joined the Killer Instinct roster. Oddly enough, this Arbiter is not the same as the original one from Halo, but instead an amalgamation of traits of other Arbiters. His guest appearance would make Killer Instinct the 2nd fighting game to feature a Halo character. Kula Diamond and Mai Shiranui, Dead or Alive 6. Incorporating Kula into Dead or Alive probably wasn't too much of a task, seeing this isn't her first time in a 3D fighting game, as she was in the 2nd installment of KOF's 3D spin-off series Maximum Impact. Additionally, Kula's inclusion into Dead or Alive was seemingly hinted at during Dead or Alive 5 Last Round's run, as she appeared in a special crossover wallpaper alongside Marie Rose. This and the wallpaper featuring Kasumi and Mai were released to celebrate KOF 14's release to Steam and Dead or Alive 5 Last Round Core Fighter surpassing 8 million downloads. Speaking of Mai, this return to Dead or Alive 6 would mark one of the very few times a guest character made multiple and back-to-back playable appearances in a fighting game series. Seeing that Mai has been called a Dead or Alive character before Dead or Alive even existed, of course she would be the one to have such an honor. Brawlhalla guests. The platform fighter Brawlhalla features guest characters from a wide variety of IPs, including other fighting games like Street Fighter and Rivals of Aether, other video game franchises like Rayman, Shovel Knight, and Tomb Raider, with Lara Croft being the lone representative, media franchises like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Adventure Time, Ben 10, Hellboy, G.I. Joe, Kung Fu Panda, Steven Universe, X-Ray and Vav, and The Walking Dead. And finally, Brawlhalla went as far as to cross over with the WWE, including 8 superstars as playable characters, tying with the number of Street Fighter representatives. Spartan 458, Dead or Alive 4. Remember earlier in this layer of the iceberg when I mentioned how Killer Instinct was the 2nd game to feature a Halo guest character? Well, Dead or Alive 4 was the first, albeit this entry is a little bit weird. Originally, Team Ninja wanted to include Master Chief on the roster. Bungie turned it down due to storyline restrictions. However, the company liked the idea, so they drew up a Spartan not entirely linked to the Halo universe that would fit into DOA, thus leading to the creation of Spartan 458. Also known as Nicole or Nicole 458, she would be unlocked after you play through every character's story. Though she is clearly a Halo creation, Dead or Alive 4 was her first ever appearance in a video game. Yep. This is a rare instance in fighting games where a character made their video game debut as a guest character. Despite being specifically made for Dead or Alive 4, Nicole 458 isn't canon to the game. Her canon status in Halo is rather murky, as it has been widely disputed and debated. Nicole 458 came packaged with the Halo-themed Nassau Station stage, which is actually the Cairo station from Halo 2. Nicole 458 specializes in quick and powerful standard military close quarters combat and even comes equipped with Halo-themed technology including plasma grenades and active camouflage. She also lifts a few moves from Bayman and Leon. This is interesting considering some of Nicole's moves would go on to be adapted by Rachel in the sequel due to the former's inability to return to the series. Norimaru, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, Japanese version. Norimaru is yet another example of a character making their video game debut as a guest character. He was collaboratively designed by Capcom and comedian Noritake Kinashi, the latter of whom also provided the character's voice. He's a cowardly fighter who fights by flailing his arms and throwing school supplies, mini Akuma dolls, and plushies at his opponents. Norimaru was removed from all overseas ports of the game due to intense pushback from Marvel, who didn't like the idea of an unpowered joke character fighting against their superpowered heroes. Further proof of Norimaru's last-minute scrapping could be found in the files that were unearthed from the game, showing nearly completed translation work for him. Also, much like the previous entry, elements of his fighting style would be adapted by a character in a latter installment, as Phoenix Wright possesses a fighting without fighting style gimmick. Furthermore, seeing the rights to Norimaru are jointly owned by Capcom, Nippon TV, and Arrival, future usage of him would have to be approved by all three companies, making any future inclusion of him pretty difficult and highly unlikely. Ori and Sign and Shovel Knight, Rivals of Aether. Rivals of Aether is an indie platform fighter that has garnered significant praise among fans and critics who point to its depth and visual design as some of its strongest qualities. Though it may not have as many as the other previously mentioned platform fighters, Rivals of Aether still got in on the guest character action. One such character actually appeared in one of those aforementioned games, Shovel Knight, who was the game's second guest fighter. The first was Ori, the main protagonist of Ori and the Blind Forest, a resplendent platform adventure Metroidvania game. Being accompanied by supporting character Sign, a creature containing the power of the Spirit Tree, which acts as a guide and weapon, Ori is the only character in Rivals of Aether to have a partner that follows them in battle. They approximately track Ori's movements, albeit with a delay, which can result in the two becoming immensely desynced should Ori perform lots of running and jumping. Shovel Knight of the critically acclaimed game of the same name also makes an appearance as well, which makes this his second appearance on this Iceberg, and spoiler, it won't be his last. Sakura Kasagano, Rival Schools, United by Fate. Long before Akira came to Street Fighter, Sakura Kasagano made a playable guest appearance in the first Rival Schools. Again, seeing that Rival Schools takes place in a shared universe with Street Fighter and being a high school student, Sakura made for a perfect guest fighter. Director Hideaki Itsuno revealed in an interview that he wanted to bring Sakura in as insurance, fearing that the game wouldn't sell well. Seeing that Sakura had quickly garnered popularity upon her debut, which was roughly a year before Rival Schools' debut, not a bad pick for somebody with some drawing power. Terry Bogard, multiple games. Terry Bogard is one of the most recognizable fighting game characters ever. His entry into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is arguably his most well-known guest appearance, coming in equipped with a strong combo-oriented game plan and his gold meter comeback mechanic, allowing him to perform high-damaging finishers. The legendary Wolf also found himself in the formerly mysterious fighting game Fighting EX Layer, a fighting game that, despite Terry's popularity, never really got any large, long-standing momentum, effectively becoming a cult favorite. The most obscure of Terry's guest fighter appearances is actually his first one on record, Jindoji Wong. This fighting game by Tencent, which came with its very first beta build in 2011, was immensely influenced by the King of Fighters series, from the gameplay to some of the character designs. Terry was one of 2 guest fighters added to the game in 2013 through a deal with SNK.
We must dive beneath the waters to explore the subconscious, to face the past.
Benimaru Nikaido, Jindoji Wong. Almost everyone who isn't a hardcore fighting game nerd tends to overlook Benimaru when talking about SNK characters who have made guest appearances in other fighters. Good old Benny Boy was the other character included in the deal between Tencent and SNK. While he isn't as big a star as Terry or Kyo, Benimaru is far from being a bit player. He's the most decorated KOF champion, winning more KOF tournaments than any other character and being one of few characters in KOF to step out from his superior shadow and lead his own team. I couldn't find any actual explanation as to why Benimaru was chosen. I personally feel like SNK wanted to do something a bit surprising, expectation shattering, as opposed to just throwing in Kyo. Not to mention, Jindoji Wong already had a Kyo knockoff. Henry Rollins, Danny Trejo, and Omar Epps. Def Jam Fight for New York. This is a funny entry for a couple of reasons, because if you're not familiar with the source material, you would think, wouldn't all the rappers in this game be from the Def Jam label? Turns out, no. Absolutely not. Even the main antagonist of the story, Crow, who is portrayed by one Snoop Dogg, not only wasn't on the label at the time of Fight for New York's release, but has never been on the label at least until June 2021, when he officially joined the label as its new executive, creative, and strategic consultant. Foreshadowing much? This is all to say that if we were going by the precedent of every real-life person in this game that wasn't associated with or worked for Def Jam at the time of this game's release, we would have a bunch more guest characters. However, since the whole biggest selling thing with Def Jam, and I mean past the first game they went on, of course, to include rappers from all different types of labels, we're just judging this based on who is not a hip-hop personality. And even with that being said, it's gonna get weird treading into this entry, but stick with me. So, Def Jam Fight for New York kinda sorta had a bit of a resurgence after Watch Mojo included it in its top 20 greatest fighting games of all time, and Maximilian playing the heck out of it recently. But this game is usually considered the best Def Jam fighting / wrestling game, and the last great one, as the sequel, Def Jam Icon, was incredibly polarizing. Of course, this game involves various hip-hop artists and personalities and original characters brawling it out in what we call in the wrestling biz, no-holds-barred matches. There are also notable playable characters from outside the hip-hop universe. Hardcore punk icon Henry Rollins has a sizable role in the game's story, serving as your character's trainer. And now that I'm just now thinking about it, Henry Rollins actually played Vanilla Ice in the music video for Third Base's Pop Goes the Weasel. And if you're wondering why I randomly brought that up, Third Base was a rap group signed to Def Jam. This was way before Fight for New York came out, but still, that kinda makes the connection a little less far-fetched. Then you have actor Danny Trejo, who is one of the enforcers of the main antagonist, Crow. Omar Epps is where this gets a little bit weird, because while he's mostly known for acting, he's actually released a rap album and has made several guest features on hip-hop tracks with the likes of Sticky Fingers, who is in this game, and Saigon. He actually started rapping as early as 1991 in a group with his cousin called Wolfpack, and this was before his big breakout film Juice, so hey, what are you gonna do? Lars Alexanderson, Naruto Shippuden, Ultimate Ninja Storm 2. Similar to some previous entries on this Iceberg, Lars' guest appearance in Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm 2 was seemingly hinted at a while before it occurred. When he debuted in Tekken 6 Bloodline Revolution in 2008, he came packaged with an alternate costume designed by manga artist Masashi Kishimoto, known for writing the Naruto series. The next year, CyberConnect 2 CEO Hiroshi Matsuyama read in a weekly Shonen Jump magazine that Lars should be included in Ultimate Ninja Storm 2. Matsuyama then proceeded to run the idea by Tekken 6 producer Suguru Sasaki. Once it had been approved, the Tekken staff helped adjust Lars' moves to fit the other characters in Ultimate Ninja Storm 2. Matsuyama was pleasantly surprised at the end result, remarking that Lars fit quite well with the Naruto cast. Ryo Sakazaki, aka Mr. Karate 2, multiple games. Whereas Terry made 3 different guest fighter appearances in non-SNK fighting games, Ryo made 3 guest fighter appearances all within SNK fighting games. Fatal Fury Special was an update of Fatal Fury 2, which also featured Ryo as a secret boss. He was also in Fatal Fury Wild Ambition, a 3D remake of the first Fatal Fury, but under the name Mr. Karate 2 with something of a considerable redesign. Ryo would then be redesigned and carrying the title of Mr. Karate 2 yet again in Bariki 1, being the representative for, you guessed it, karate. Here he rocks a full-on coal-colored gi, which Hideaki preferred over his signature orange gi. Various Street Fighter characters, Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, and Legacy Wars. Ryu and Chun-Li are practically always present when it comes to big-time Capcom fighting game cross-promotion, from Capcom's many crossover fighting games to a relatively more out-there franchise like Power Rangers. On April 13th, 2021, Ryu and Chun-Li were announced as additional playable characters in a Street Fighter pack, which would be released May 25th. They would utilize their designs from their Power Rangers Legacy Wars appearance, with Ryu as the Crimson Hawk Ranger and Chun-Li as the Blue Phoenix Ranger. Cool names. Speaking of Legacy Wars, which if you didn't know is a mobile fighting game, several Street Fighter characters were added to the game in their Street Fighter V incarnations in a May 2018 update. Ryu, Chun-Li, Guile, Akuma, Cammy, and Bison. Skullo Lady and Thief Arthur. SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy. Seemingly another instance of guest character exchange, SNK Heroines included two guest characters from two different franchises. First was Thief Arthur, the main character from the Square Enix media franchise Million Arthur, who came with an incredibly exuberant and flashy fighting style. Then, as if it wasn't already a surprise that they midnight blissed Terry for the game, but they also did the same for Skullomania, who became Skullo Lady. She came equipped with Skullomania's fun factor and signature silliness. Of course, this seems like an exchange for Terry being in Fighting EX Layer. In the case of Thief Arthur, if you don't already know, you'll soon know as you dive deeper into this iceberg. Samurai Shodown 2019 guests. When Samurai Shodown began adding DLC characters to the game, most of them were fan favorites that placed very high in a popularity poll SNK conducted. There were quite a few players here and there that entertained the possibility of guest characters being included in this game. Said players got their wish in Season Pass 2 as the Warden from For Honor closed it out. The surprises didn't stop with the Warden, as SNK had given players a second DLC character freebie in the form of Gongsun Li from the China-exclusive MOBA Honor of Kings. Honor of Kings was published by Tencent, who, as we previously mentioned, had done business with SNK before. This would also include the inclusion of several SNK characters as guests into Honor of Kings. Gotta love those guest character exchanges. Then along came one of the most popular characters from Samsho's sister series, say that 5 times fast, The Last Blade's Hibiki Takane. This would mark her first major playable fighting game appearance in 18 years, as the last time we saw her was in CVS 2. A character that didn't have such an enormous gap between playable fighting game appearances is the final guest character of Samsho and the game's final DLC character, Baiken. While Strive was going strong, one of the most popular Guilty Gear characters was making a killer appearance in Samurai Shodown. Baiken would eventually make it to Strive early the following year. Ryugi Shiki and Saber, Melty Blood. Melty Blood is a fighting game co-developed by French Bread and Type Moon. It serves as a meta-sequel to the visual novels Tsukihime and Kagetsu Toya, both of which account for most of the series' playable characters. Shiki Ryugi is somewhat of an outlier coming from the Garden of Sinners, a dark fantasy light novel series that preceded Tsukihime. The Garden of Sinners is set in an alternate universe to Tsukihime and Fate Stay Night, serving as something of a prototype for both series. Speaking of Fate Stay Night, Saber would be playable in Melty Blood Type Lumina in 2021, roughly 6 years after making her playable guest appearance in Nitro Plus Blasters. Arale Norimaki, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Arale is one of the most interesting entries on this iceberg, as Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is far past the first time she's crossed over into the Dragon Ball universe. She's made appearances in numerous other Dragon Ball games, as well as serving as something of a minor supporting character in the anime and manga. Her home series, Dr. Slump, was the manga that broke Akira Toriyama into the mainstream before creating Dragon Ball. Despite her small form and goofy demeanor, Arale is deceptively strong. She can move at Mach 1 speed while walking and can split the earth in half with a punch. So knowing that, seeing her going toe-to-toe with the likes of Broly and others in the Dragon Ball universe no longer seems like a joke. Boogerman and Earthworm Jim, Clay Fighter 63 and a third. There's quite a bit of fascinating info about this pair of guest characters. They were both voiced by Dan Castellaneta, famously known for voicing this guy. Booger Man, known for his pick and flick adventure, was created by Interplay Productions, the same company that made Clay Fighter. Earthworm Jim was created by Shiny Entertainment, whom Interplay would purchase shortly after the release of Earthworm Jim 2. Booger Man and Earthworm Jim would also be storyline rivals in Clay Fighter 63 1/3. This rivalry appears to be exclusive to the game, seeing they had never interacted beforehand. In an unusual twist, their rivalry is retconned in the Sculptor's Cut update of the game, with Earthworm Jim's rival being Ichabod Clay instead. Final Fantasy VII characters. Ehrgeiz, God Bless the Ring. Ehrgeiz is something of a cult classic 3D fighter that stood out for incorporating gameplay elements reminiscent of those in wrestling games and in Dream Factory's very own Tobal series. The game is also known for its inclusion of Final Fantasy characters. Initially, Cloud Strife and Tifa Lockhart were available at the start of both the arcade and PlayStation version. The PlayStation version included 4 more characters. Sephiroth was instantly available, while Vincent Valentine, Yuffie Kisaragi, and Zack Fair are all hidden unlockable characters. It's assumed that these characters were added to Ehrgeiz to further milk the success of Final Fantasy VII, which had been released the previous year. Johnny Gat and the Fencer. Dive Kick. Though it was intended to be a parody fighting game, Dive Kick reinforced key fundamentals of fighting games such as spacing and mind games. The initial roster consisted of original characters, most of whom parody other fighting game characters and FGC personalities. The 2 guest characters arrived in the newer editions of the game. Johnny Gat of Saints Row came first. His inclusion came as a result of an exchange on Twitter stemming from a fan praising Dive Kick and Saints Row in the same tweet. The official Twitter accounts for both games chimed in, reacting positively to the idea of a crossover. Johnny Gat came to Dive Kick equipped with his Black Hole Launcher as his air special, summoning a card to run over the opponent as his ground special, and was accompanied by fellow Saints Row character Shandi, who assists Johnny with his dubstep gun whenever he activates Kick Factor. The Fencer from Nidhogg was the game's final guest character. He was able to throw his sword and tumble to dodge attacks if he's unarmed. When he activates Kick Factor, he can win the round by reaching the other side of the screen at the time before his meter runs out, similar to the mechanics of his native game. PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale guests. In 2012, Sony threw its hat into the platform fighter market with PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. The roster was predominantly made of characters from PlayStation exclusive games. This game would follow other platform fighters by including third-party guest characters, all of which have had games on PlayStation, but other consoles as well. Big Daddy from BioShock, the DMC Devil May Cry version of Dante, the Metal Gear Revengeance version of Raiden, the Tekken Tag 2 version of Heihachi, and Isaac Clarke from Dead Space, who was DLC. The game was set to get another third-party guest character in Abe from Oddworld, but got scrapped along with other DLC due to the low sales of the previous batch of DLC. Million Arthur Arcana Blood guests. In the PlayStation 4 ports of Million Arthur Arcana Blood, which were released November 29, 2018 in Japan, the game had received 4 more characters. One of them was KOF's Iori Yagami. Of course, if you didn't already know, this was the other half of the exchange between SNK and Square Enix that was hinted at earlier in the Iceberg. Reese from the RPG Trials of Mana and Koume Sakayama from the fantasy card collector game Lord of Vermilion were also added. The oddest one that was presented to me is Yamaneko Arthur, aka Wildcat Arthur, from Hangyakusei Million Arthur, an MMO spin-off of the Million Arthur series first released in China on March of 2018 that even got an anime adaptation. Though she debuted in a spin-off of Million Arthur rather than the main series, I initially figured that wouldn't make her a guest character. The only source I could find that calls Yamaneko Arthur a guest character is her Mizumi page, which even their guest is in air quotes, so even the person that put this together is questioning it like I am right now, so I don't know. If I'm overlooking something, do feel free to let me know in the comments. Zero Akuma, Cyberbots, Full Metal Madness. Cyberbot seemed like it was down for obscurity after its release. The inclusion of its characters in other prominent games like Devilot and Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, and Jin Sao Tome and Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2, the game still had something of a presence in the mid to late 90s. Cyberbot saw some renewed interest upon the announcement of its inclusion in the Capcom Fighting Collection. This is yet another out-of-the-box guest character example, as Akuma doesn't appear in this game himself. Instead, it's a giant mecha Akuma being piloted by Emperor Death Satan. Regardless, the mech fights just like Akuma, Shun Gokusatsu included. Zero Akuma is playable with the usage of a code. Paul Phoenix and Martial Law, Urban Reign. Urban Reign is a beat-em-up fighting game hybrid with a fighting engine inspired by other 3D fighting games such as Power Stone, Ehrgeiz, and Tobal 2. Being that it was a 3D fighting game developed by Namco, surely the company found it befitting to include some characters from its most popular fighting game franchise, Tekken. Paul Phoenix and Martial Law join Urban Reign's playable cast of original brawlers. The render art for both characters actually came from Tekken 5, which had came out the same year. As is the case with most guest characters, Paul and Law are not involved in the game's storyline. Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climax Guests. This franchise fighter consists of various characters from light novels published under the Dengeki Bunko imprint. The boss characters, however, hail from the game's publisher Sega, Akira Yuki and Pai-chan from Virtua Fighter being one rare instance of a 3D fighting game character going 2D. They will become playable in the console version as well as later versions of the arcade port. Additionally, the console version would receive another pair of guest fighters from Sega, Sylvaria Bless and Alicia Melchiot from the RPG Valkyria Chronicles. Chocobo, Tobal 2. Tobal 2 was a strong follow-up to its predecessor, which itself was pretty good. Unfortunately, Tobal 1's disappointing sales resulted in 2's overseas release getting cancelled, making it a Japan-exclusive game. At the time of its release, Tobal 2 held the record for the largest character roster in a fighting game with 200, though most of them were copy and paste jobs and different monsters in the game, but whatever. With such an insanely massive roster, the inclusion of a guest character shouldn't come as a shock, and the inclusion of the Chocobo probably made for a nice surprise. One of the most recognizable creatures from Final Fantasy, the Chocobo also comes packaged in Tobal 2 with a remix of the Chocobo theme. Also, you're treated to this when you clear tournament mode with the Chocobo. Abraham Lincoln and Fred Durst. Fight Club. Well, that's a couple of names I never thought I'd say back to back. First rule of Fight Club, something something, don't talk about something something. In a hilarious twist, many people don't talk about this Fight Club because it was met with negative reviews and was a commercial failure. The game rewards you with Limp Bizkit's Fred Durst for clearing story mode. Fred Durst, who had been a guest character in 2 WWE games, WWE Raw and SmackDown Just Bring It, both of which preceded Fight Club. Arguably much cooler yet simultaneously odd is the inclusion of former US President Abraham Lincoln. In case you don't know, Abe Lincoln was a hell of a wrestler in his youth. He became county champion at age 21 and is in a Wrestling Hall of Fame, and no, not that one. Abe's inclusion into the game is probably a nod to the Fight Club character Tyler Durden, who says he'd fight him, saying, quote, "Big guy, big reach. Skinny guys fight till they're a burger. Make of that what you will. I actually have never seen the movie." Megaman.exe and Zero. Unimusha Blade Warriors. Unimusha Blade Warriors is a non-canonical platform fighting game for the PS2. As the Unimusha games take place in feudal Japan, the inclusion of Megaman.exe and Zero as hidden unlockable characters is quite anachronistic, but cool nonetheless. These were 2 interesting choices for guest characters for a couple of reasons. For starters, it was cool to see them pick alternate forms of the 2 popular Mega Man characters, as Megaman.exe hailed from Mega Man Battle Network, and this particular Zero is the one from the Mega Man Zero series. Both series were still active and going strong around the time of Unimusha Blade Warriors' release. Rimi Sakahata and Kurisu Makase. Phantom Breaker. Originally released back in 2011, Phantom Breaker recently made a comeback with the Omnia update released on March 15, 2022. The 2 guest characters we are looking at here were actually in the game from the get-go. Rimi Sakahata is one of the main characters in the sci-fi visual novel Chaos Head, which I have yet to play. and as a visual novel lover, I need to fix that. In Phantom Breaker, she is a rushdown character equipped with a delusion ideal sword, and being a gigalomaniac, she can conjure her delusions into reality. Yeah, I need to play Chaos Head. Kurisu Makise is one of the main characters of Steins Gate. She's a genius that graduated from an American university super early. Along with being super brainy, she's also armed with educated feet in Phantom Breaker, mixing a kick-heavy fighting style while utilizing an arsenal of interesting gadgets she helped develop. In case you didn't already know, while Rimi and Kurisu are from different games, both games are part of the Science Adventure series, a collection of interconnected sci-fi visual novels, if you're interested. Saber, Homura, and Heart Aino. Nitro Plus Blaster's heroine's infinite duel. Nitro Plus is mostly known for developing visual novels, which would explain the immense amount of visual novel characters on the roster of this mascot fighting game. Even one of the game's guest characters, Saber, hails from a visual novel series, Type Moon's Fate Stay Night. Seeing Nitro Plus has collaborated extensively with Type Moon to create Fate Stay Night, Saber's inclusion had to be an easy call. Homura hails from Senran Kagura, a video game series consisting of various types of games, as well as characters that have appeared in various games. Finally, there's Heart Aino, the super sweet, love-worshipping main protagonist of the fighting game Arcana Heart. Homura and Heart Aino would be available as DLC in the console versions of Nitro Plus Blasters. It's interesting considering we'd have Heart Aino and another Senran Kagura character as DLC in a game that would come out roughly 3 years after Nitro Plus Blasters. Blaze Blue Cross Tag Battle. Karnov, Fighter's History. Karnov is one of the earliest fighting game guest characters and is sometimes considered the first guest character in fighting game history. He originally debuted in a Data East platformer of the same name where he's the main protagonist. When he appeared in the first Fighter's History, he was the main antagonist. We've seen a couple of fighting game guest characters that have also been canon, but not many can boast that they were simultaneously the main antagonist. It has been noted that his home game and Fighter's History storyline should be considered as a separate continuity. Makes sense. Even more of a rarity is the fact that he was playable in every Fighter's History game, making him the only, if not one of the very few guest characters to make a playable appearance in every game in a fighting game series. Karnov and his likeness appeared across many other Data East games. Additionally, Karnov was reportedly designed as the spitting image of a certain boss at Data East HQ. Said boss was apparently angered about this, but had to grin and bear it, as Karnov went on to be considered some of Data East's finest work. This, along with the fact that he went on to be Data East's mascot, it made total sense why the company pushed Karnov the way they did. Shelnov, Fighter's History. Shelnov, making his debut in Fighter's History Mizoguchi Kiki Ipatsu, followed in Karnov's footsteps in being yet another Fighter's History guest character that was also a final boss and main antagonist. In this game, Shelnov is the organizer of the main tournament in the Fighter's History universe, the Great Grapple Tournament. He is placed opposite of the game's titular main protagonist, Makoto Mizoguchi. Much like Karnov, Shelnov's home game also bears his name, Atomic Runner Shelnov. This game is a scrolling shooter which follows the title character who obtains superhuman abilities after being exposed to radiation after a nuclear power plant's explosion. Given the scenario and the speculations around Shelnov's name, this game was perceived as a thinly veiled reference to the Chernobyl disaster. Data East countered this controversy by first claiming Shelnov and Karnov were related, thus explaining their similar names. Another Data East employee claimed the game had a different name in the beginning and had been changed to Shelnov after talk of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had become more prominent. Despite the controversies, which led to the game's story being drastically rewritten and the game being simply renamed Atomic Runner in North America and Europe, Shelnov still remained one of Data East's most prominent characters. Ox, Fighter's History. Ox is a secret boss character in Fighter's History Dynamite, aka Karnov's Revenge. You are able to fight him after winning the game without losing any rounds. The fight with Ox only lasts 1 round and will end the game regardless of whether you beat him or if he tramples you. Speaking of trampling, this Ox would do just that to the fighters who failed to stop him in his original game, Karate Champ. This game is one of the most influential, as many martial arts games would take inspiration from it. Karate Champ included a mini-game in which you have to land a hit on a bull charging towards you. Some sources also claim that the Ox is more of a character referencing the bull from Karate Champ rather than being the bull itself. Jensao Tome, Tech Romancer. Techromancer, a heavily mecha anime-influenced fighting game, is yet another underrated Capcom gem. The game was first released in 1998, which apparently was an interesting year for Jinsao Tomei and Blodia. In January of that year, Jin would make one of his more well-known playable fighting game appearances in Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes. Later that year in September, he'd also be a secret character in Techromancer. Seeing that this game also involves people piloting fighting robots, yeah, Jin was an easy choice. Not to mention, Jin's appearance in MVC1 probably boosted his popularity as he was one of the game's most fun characters. Unlike in the MVC series, this would be one of few crossover appearances where Jin primarily fights while piloting Blodia. Pepsi Man, Fighting Vipers, Japanese Sega Saturn version. Pepsi Man was the mascot for Japan's corporate branch of Pepsi. Surprise. In case you're curious, yes, there was a Pepsi woman as well. While he may look pretty cool, he's actually been shown in commercials to be a cool-looking klutzy punching bag. However, the guy is S+ tier in delivering Pepsi to people. Once again, surprise. How does that translate over into a fighting game? Who cares? Free advertising, am I right? Of course, as I mentioned earlier, only Japanese ports of the games would have Pepsi Man. Though he wouldn't return to the Fighting Vipers sequel, Pepsi Man would get his own eponymous Endless Runner game 5 years later. Shovel Knight and Azure Striker Gunvolt. Blade Strangers. Blade Strangers is a crossover fighting game by Nicalis Inc., centered mostly around the company's many IPs. There are even 2 characters that are exclusive to this very game, one of them being the game's main antagonist. The game also consists of 2 characters from outside IPs, one of which is Shovel Knight. Nice to see you again. Still armed with his trusty shovel. Even in Blade Strangers, he's susceptible to the same ridicule for his weapon of choice, just as he is in his home game. Gunvolt, from Azure Striker Gunvolt, is this game's other guest character. Like Shovel Knight, Gunvolt also hails from a lauded side-scrolling platformer. Gunvolt is pretty fast on his feet, has powerful hit confirms, and is able to replenish his meter at will in Blade Strangers. Of course, he's a glass cannon. Fair enough. Gunvolt has also made multiple guest appearances in other games, including platform racer Runbow and Indie Pogo, a crossover platform fighter that also features Shovel Knight. Nice to see you, yet again. Earthworm Jim Battle Arena Toshinden PC version. Roughly 2 years before he made a playable guest appearance in Clay Fighter, Earthworm Jim was a secret unlockable character in the PC version of Battle Arena Toshinden, utilizing the moveset of Rungo Iron. This game is cited as the first ever 3D weapons fighter, even preceding the Soul Calibur series. The PC port of Toshinden was released on April 22, 1996 in North America, which just so happened to be 8 days before the North American PC release of Earthworm Jim 2. Honey the Cat, Sonic the Fighters. Honey the Cat is yet another odd entry in this iceberg, as she's a redesigned version of another established character. Sonic the Fighters was basically a stripped-down version of Fighting Vipers. The same Fighting Vipers which has a character named Honey, also known as Not Coola's sister Candy. And the cat you see in Sonic the Fighters is a furry-fied version of her. Hiroshi Kataoka, the director of Sonic the Fighters, further adding that she was included by the game's designer as a test. She was designed by Masahiro Sugiyama, the character designer for both Fighting Vipers and Sonic the Fighters. She was scrapped from the original arcade ports, though she was still accessible through hacking. In the 2012 PS3 Xbox 360 re-release of Sonic the Fighters, Honey the Cat was made into a full-fledged playable character. Street Fighter Online Mouse Generation Guests. This was a 2008 Japan-exclusive Street Fighter spin-off web browser game exclusively for the PC. As the title suggests, the mouse serves as your primary means of controlling your character. Moving the mouse horizontally will move the character in said direction, moving it up will cause your character to jump, left and right click are punch and kick respectively, and the scroll wheel in the center enables you to perform supers. It was a game that was clearly tailored towards more casual gamers. When it comes to guest characters in this game, it gets a bit weird. For starters, it depends on how you look at Street Fighter Online. Despite the title, the game initially started as something of a crossover between the Street Fighter cast and characters from the novels of the late Jin Young. Taking it from that perspective, the cyborgs from the manga Cyborg 009, Johannes Krauser II from Detroit Metal City, Gavin from the tokusatsu series Space Sheriff Gavin, and Batsu and Akira from Rival Schools, which shares a universe with Street Fighter, could be considered guests in this game. The game even includes former US President Barack Obama, who was Valentine's Day DLC for some reason. Street Fighter Online Mouse Generation would later go offline and is now considered lost media. Ikuro Hashizawa, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle has recently experienced a comeback of sorts with the announcement of the All-Star Battle R remaster. Again, in case you don't know, I know next to nothing about the JoJo's franchise. Still, seeing this looked like a cool fighting game, I had to try it and I really enjoyed it. It was a cool little surprise learning that there was a guest character on this game's roster. Ikuro Hashizawa's origin story involves him being kidnapped and turned into a bioweapon with superhuman strength called a Bao, which is also the name of the manga series he hails from. Similar to several other entries on this Iceberg, this guest appearance was quite befitting, as Bao and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure were written and illustrated by the same person, Hirohiko Araki. Not only did Bao precede JoJo's, but it was notable for being the first of Araki's Gorefest mangas. There's a Bao OVA out there if you're interested, and as a lover of dark fantasy, horror, anime, and manga, I'm definitely checking that out. The Rabbids, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Smash Up. Rabbids are alien-like rabbit creatures prominently featured in the series of the same name. They first appeared in Rayman Raving Rabbids, a party game that's a spin-off in the Rayman series. In Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Smash Up, there are 3 Rabbids that are playable, all with different looks and movesets. One of them is a normal Rabbid, another decked out in Splinter Cell gear, and one dressed like a Ninja Turtle. Apparently the Rabbids were not well received by many players who saw their inclusion as nonsensical and a waste of a character slot. Spider-Man, X-Men Mutant Academy 2. X-Men Mutant Academy 2 was considered a massive improvement over its predecessor. This could be due in part to the game's many unlockables giving players an incentive to replay the game despite its lack of gameplay modes. One of the unlockables was a guest character in the form of Spider-Man, whom you could unlock by defeating him in arcade mode or via the usage of a code, the latter of which is how I unlocked him. Tips and tricks was the shiz back in the day. Spider-Man announces himself when chosen on the character select, whereas Professor X announces everyone else, including X himself. Usually when you beat arcade mode in fighting games, you are treated to an ending cinematic that usually tells more story centered around the character you played. When you complete this game's arcade mode with Spider-Man, you get a promotional video for Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro. While Enter Electro had preceded X-Men Mutant Academy 2, it is worth noting that the former had stumbled into a controversy around the time of the latter's release. Enter Electro was one of several games affected by 9/11, as Activision reworked it to remove references to the Twin Towers. Copies of the original game were pulled from stores and later replaced with edited versions in October of that year. Zero, Project G. Project G is a 2009 indie PC fighting game by Arashi 200XJP. I hope I said that right. It was created with Interbrain's fighting game engine. The playable cast consists of original characters and Mega Man X's Zero. Zero has moves from X4 and moves reminiscent of X6 in his arsenal in this game. Though Project G is fairly obscure, it has the interesting honor of featuring Zero from Mega Man X in a fighting game before the likes of major games like Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, and yeah, even Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Ryu, American Dad vs. Family Guy. American Dad vs. Family Guy is a crossover browser fighting game consisting of characters from the eponymous animated comedy shows. Street Fighter's Ryu is not only a playable character, but is also the game's final boss. For some reason, the boss battle takes place in the Ayutthaya Ruins, which is Sagat's stage. Information about this game is pretty sparse, so more than likely we'll never know why they included Ryu of all characters. Perhaps it's nothing too complex and it was simply because he's arguably the most recognizable fighting character ever. Kotaro Fuma, Aggressors of Dark Combat. Known in Japan as Thrilling Intense March, aggressors of dark, not Mortal Kombat was unable to measure up to other prominent fighting games at the time of its release in 1994. Despite its unique mechanic of enabling characters to move closer or farther from the screen in a 2D game, many players and critics claim that it didn't really add any innovation or depth to the game. The game still did manage to have a bit of a presence in later years, with Kisara Westfield appearing in Neo Geo Battle Coliseum. Kotaro Fuma of World Heroes makes a playable guest appearance in Dark Combat, he's also in Battle Coliseum as well, due to getting lost during one of his time trials and ending up in Japan in the year 1994. This of course explains his rather anachronistic appearance. Despite that, Kotaro was always a cool character to where something like that really wouldn't matter all that much. Skullomania, Fighter Maker, Japanese version. A couple decades before getting Midnight Blissed into SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy, Skullomania was a playable guest character in the first Fighter Maker game. Not only would this be Skullomania's earliest fighting game guest appearance, but his inclusion made him the only licensed character in the game, albeit in the Japan versions only. It's a bit of a letdown, but that was the reality of the time. Of course, as the years went on, console exclusives would become the thing. Mighty Fight Federation guests. Mighty Fight Federation is a game I wish had gotten more recognition. Decent gameplay, some weird yet interesting characters, and a banger of an OST. This 3D arena fighter may make you think of the classic Power Stone series. Mighty Fight came with a couple of guest characters on the base roster, and coincidentally, both are pairs of characters. The duo of Yooka-Laylee hail from the platformer of the same name, which is a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. It's kinda awesome how both of these duos have made guest appearances in fighting games. The other duo comes from another one of my favorite video games growing up, ToeJam and Earl. While the former duo fight simultaneously, ToeJam and Earl fight one at a time, tagging in and out akin to a pro wrestling tag team, making their combos some of the coolest and most satisfying to pull off. Miriam from the dark fantasy Metroidvania game Bloodstained Ritual of the Night was added in via an update. I've never played Bloodstained, but the character and her playstyle look hella cool. Finally, some DLC came in the form of Kunio Enriki from the classic Technos Japan video game series Kunio-kun. This was quite a special inclusion, seeing that at the time of Mighty Fight Federation's release, Kunio-kun was owned by Arc System Works. At the time of recording, ArcSys still owns the rights to the franchise. Power Instinct Matra Melee guests. Power Instinct Matra Melee, or simply Matra Melee, is the 5th installment of Power Instinct, a fighting game series created by Atlus known for its quirky characteristics and absurdist humor. Matra Melee is arguably one of the most interesting entries in the Power Instinct series. For starters, Noise Factory had obtained the rights from Atlus to carry on with the franchise. Matra Melee would be the second fighting game developed by Noise Factory. Interestingly, their first fighting game, Rage of the Dragons, would have 4 of its characters make playable guest appearances in Matra Melee: Elias Patrick, Jimmy Lewis, Johnny Jones, and Lynn Baker. However, these characters would be removed in the PlayStation 2 port. Said port would come with Bobby Strong, whose inclusion could be compared to Norimaru in Marvel Super Heroes vs. Street Fighter. This is due to the fact that he is a cartoonish version of a real-life person, that being mixed martial artist turned comedian and TV personality Bobby Ologun. Del Sol, Force 5. Del Sol is a Mexican luchador who's an unlockable character in Fighting Vipers 2. He would go on to make a guest appearance in Force 5, an unreleased Atomic Wave 3D fighting game from Sammy. Despite being unreleased, you can find plenty of footage of it online. I couldn't find lots of verified info on this game, as most of it is hearsay. That, along with its obscurity, is why this entry is so far down this iceberg. Makoto Mizuguchi and Liu Yungmie, Outlaws of the Lost Dynasty. Though many may point to KOF Maximum Impact Regulation A as his surprise comeback since Fighter's history folded, Makoto Mizuguchi made a guest appearance in Outlaws of the Lost Dynasty. Known as Suiku Inbu in Japan and Dark Legend in North America, this was a 1995 Data East fighting game consisting of characters inspired by Water Margin, a 14th century Chinese classic novel. A Japan-exclusive semi-sequel titled Suiku Inbu Fuin Psyche would have Makoto Mizuguchi return, accompanied by fellow Fighters History character Liu Yungmie as playable characters. Marina Lightyear's Rakugaki Showtime. Rakugaki Showtime is a 1999 3D fighting game developed by Treasure and published by Enix for the PlayStation. Fun fact, Treasure actually had developed a fighting game 4 years prior to this one, Yu Yu Hakusho Makio Tuitsen. This game and Rakugaki Showtime share the fact that neither were officially released in North America or Europe. The frequent usage of projectiles in Rakugaki Showtime caused several people to compare the gameplay to Dodgeball. Marina Lightyears is the main protagonist of the cult classic side-scrolling platformer Mischief Makers. She's the robotic bodyguard of her creator, Professor Theo. Marina is a powerhouse, with her primary method of attack involve her shaking, grabbing, and throwing things much more massive than her. Seeing that most of the combat in Rakugaki Showtime involves chucking items, Marina was a great choice for a guest character. Treasure and Enix were also involved with the development and publishing of Mischief Makers alongside Nintendo. These two companies also sparred over who owned the rights to the characters, which resulted in Rakugaki Showtime's limited release. Indie Game Battle Guest Characters. Indie Game Battle was a platform fighter released in October 29, 2015, developed and published by Blob Game Studio. Self-explanatory by the game's title, the roster consists of characters from indie games and franchises. Like Smash Bros., which the company cites as an influence on the game, the roster consists of third-party characters outside of Blob Games. There were over 40 third-party guest characters that were planned to be included, but less than half actually made it in. Some of the notable guest characters include Brad Armstrong from the Lisa series, Fancy Pants from Fancy Pants Adventures, Goat from Goat Simulator, and Pico from his self-titled series from Newgrounds. Arguably, some of the game's more interesting guests are those that didn't originate from games, such as the web cartoon characters Salad Fingers and SCP-049, the anomaly from the SCP Foundation. On September 5th, 2017, Blob Games developer Felix had announced that Indie Game Battle had been cancelled due to stress and loss of motivation to work on the project stemming from overwhelmingly negative criticisms of the game. This is why many of the aforementioned planned characters ended up getting scrapped from the game. Go All Out guests. Go All Out is a 2019 platform fighter developed by Blue Sunset Games. Go All Out has a roster full of original characters alongside some guest characters as well. Breakbone comes from a Polish comic book series called Gajko and Kokosz, Cole Black from the psychological thriller game Get Even, Flying Hawk from the indie horror adventure game Whispering Willows, Lady Scarlet from the adventure RPG Desert Child, Tesla Kid from the side-scrolling puzzle platformer Teslagrad, Lord Clonington from the indie game World to the West, which is a spin-off sequel for Teslagrad, Raptor from the MMO Raptors Online, Yandere-chan from Yandere Simulator, and if none of those characters ring any bells, this last one probably will. Zoro. Yes, that Zoro. At the time of me writing this game's last major update was released back in February 11th, 2022, according to Steam at least, and there has allegedly been talk of more characters being added. Paperbound guests. Paperbound is a platform fighter developed and published by Distant Logic, released March 31st, 2015. Coming packaged with a unique art style and whimsical gameplay, it's quite an unsung unique experience. 6 indie game guest characters are playable in Paperbound: Goblin King from Tumblestone, the Locksmith and the Gentleman from Monaco, which yours is mine, Genevieve from Cards and Castles, and Captain Viridian from VVV. And yeah, that's how you pronounce it. Little bonus fact, it has an OST called PPP. Strange doesn't do it justice. Arguably the most familiar face in this game is Juan from Guacamelee. Zeto, Kazuna, and Ares. Combat Core. Combat Core is a sci-fi 3D arena fighter funded through Kickstarter that was released August 18th, 2016 on Steam. It is yet another game that has been compared to Power Stone, especially with the titular combat cores granting special attacks and buffs to those that collect them in battle. Zeto and Kazuna from the animated web series Tome, Terrain of Magical Expertise, appear in the game as guest characters. Their inclusion into a sci-fi themed fighting game is a fitting one when you consider Tome's influences, which include Dot Hack, and Mega Man Battle Network. The same can be said for the other game's guest character, Ares, from Ares Extinction Agenda, an indie sci-fi 2.5D side-scrolling platformer. Just like with the combat cores, Ares collects data cubes to improve his abilities in his home game. Brawlout guests. Brawlout is a 2017 indie platform fighter developed and published by Angry Mob Games for the PC, Switch, PS4, and Xbox One. Like many other platform fighters, it was also constantly compared to Super Smash Bros., although Brawlout was more combo-centric. Two of the game's guest characters may be familiar to you as we've mentioned them in previous entries, Juan from Guacamelee and Yooka-Laylee. Then there's the Beheaded from the critically acclaimed indie roguelike game Dead Cells, which had recorded over 6 million copies sold back in March 2021. Finally, the game also features the Drifter from the Kickstarter-funded 2D action RPG Hyper Light Drifter, which also received widespread critical acclaim. Bounty Battle guests. Bounty Battle is a 2020 indie 2D platformer developed and published by Dark Screen Games. Unlike most of the other indie platform fighters on this iceberg, Bounty Battle wasn't well received by players and critics, with many criticizing the animation and clunky feel of the game. However, Bounty Battle's roster is considered one of its bright spots. Touting itself as the ultimate indie fighter, a grand total of 29 guest characters from indie games are included on the playable roster, one of which is a character making their third appearance on this iceberg, Juan from Guacamelee. The other 28 are listed on the website as you can see here. Unfortunately, Bounty Battle was ultimately buried due to its overwhelmingly negative reception. It's quite a shame seeing it has a decent, interesting, diverse selection of guest characters. Alright, that was the fighting game guest character Iceberg. It was quite a lot. Like you need me to tell you that. I actually learned some interesting stuff there that I didn't know about before, which is one of my favorite things about making the content that I make. I found some new stuff to really get into. Like I said, I gotta pick up those visual novels, I gotta watch this Bao OVA. A lot of really interesting stuff. But yeah, let me know what you thought about this below. Like I said, I have another fighting game Iceberg planned for the future. Hopefully I get that out then because I feel like I'm a little bit late to the party. Also, just a heads up, Doom from the Start is coming, episode 2 about Samurai Shodown Sin. I wanted to do something a little less editing intensive, and yeah, this was a very long video to put together, but it wasn't editing intensive. Like once I pretty much got past the recording, it was just easy pickings from there on. It's just getting everything together, which I had actually done beforehand. But yeah, that's all I got for this one. By chance did I miss any other fighting game guest characters, you are more than welcome to comment below. And until next time, I am Chris Lotus, Chrysalid, all those freaking Nest themed KOF nicknames y'all gave me. And I will talk to y'all when I talk to y'all. Take care, be safe, be cool to each other, stay hydrated, all that good stuff. See ya.